In the very first days of Arda, before the two lamps were raised upon their pillars of stone, before the sun and the moon were set to sail across the sky, the world was a place of darkness and unfinished shape. The Valar had entered into it from the timeless halls, drawn by the great music that Ilúvatar had set before them, and they had found a land that was not yet a land, a sphere of raw matter, of fire and water and stone, of mountains that had not yet learned to be still, and oceans that had not yet learned to be calm. The Valar set to work. Each of them took up the part of the great vision that Ilúvatar had shown them, and they began to shape the world according to that vision. Manu walked the winds and taught the air its order. Ulmo poured through the waters and taught the seas their paths. Varda gathered the light of the stars and scattered it across the heavens. Yavanna dreamed of growing things and planted the first seeds of life in the young soil. And Aulë, the smith, the maker, the greatest craftsman of the Valar, went down into the deep places of the earth to shape the stone. Aulë loved the stone. He loved it the way that a sculptor loves marble, the way that a smith loves iron, the way that a father loves the work of his own hands. The stone of Arda was young stone, stone that had never been carved or shaped or broken, and Aulë took it and worked it with a joy that none of the other Valar could understand. He raised the mountains from the flat places of the earth. He carved the valleys and the caverns and the deep halls that lay beneath the roots of the mountains. He taught the rock to hold its form, and the metal to flow, and the crystal to catch the light. And in the darkness of the depths, far below the surface of the world, he worked alone, and he was happy, or so he believed. Part 2. The Descent. It happened on a day that had no name, because the Valar had not yet invented names for the days. Aulë had been working for a long time. How long, no one could say, because time itself was still young and had not yet learned to be measured, and he had descended deeper into the earth than he had ever gone before. He was searching for the foundation of the mountains, the root of the stone, the place where the young world held itself together. He believed that if he could find that place, he could understand the world completely, and understanding the world completely was the thing that Aulë wanted most of all. He went down through caverns that no light had ever touched. He went down through tunnels that his own hands had carved in the early days of his labor. He went down through the cracks and fissures of the earth, past the veins of metal and the seams of crystal, past the places where the rock was hot and the places where it was cold, until he came to a depth where the stone was not stone at all, but something older, something denser, something that had been there before the world was shaped. And it was there, in the absolute darkness of the deepest earth, that Aulë heard the singing. He stopped. He stood still, his great hammer hanging at his side, and he listened. The singing was soft, almost a humming, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the walls of the cavern, from the floor beneath his feet, from the air itself, if the air could be said to exist in such a place. It was not a song of power, the way that the music of the Ainur had been a song of power. It was not a song of making, the way that Aulë's own work was a song of making. It was simply a song of being, a tune that existed for no reason except that it existed, and it had been going on for so long that the stone had learned it by heart. Aulë followed the sound. He walked through the darkness toward the source of the singing, and the singing grew louder, or perhaps not louder but clearer, the way that a voice becomes clearer when the speaker is finally facing you. And at last, in the deepest chamber of the deep earth, he came to the place where the song was coming from. There was a figure sitting on a stone. Part 3. The Man on the Stone. The figure was not tall. He was not vast and radiant, the way that the Valar were vast and radiant when they chose to show themselves. He was small, almost man-sized, and he wore a blue coat and yellow boots, and a tall hat with a long blue feather in it. His face was round and cheerful, and his eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with light, because there was no light in that place, and yet the eyes were bright all the same, as if they carried their own illumination within them. He was sitting on a stone, not a throne, not a seat of power, just a stone, a plain grey rock that jutted up from the floor of the cavern, and he was tapping his yellow boots against the rock in time with his song, and he was smiling. Aulë stopped at the entrance to the chamber. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood there, the greatest craftsman in the universe, and he stared at the little man on the stone, and for the first time in the history of the world, Owl the smith did not know what to do. "Hello," said the figure. His voice was warm and easy, the voice of someone who had been expecting company for a very long time. "Hello, hello. Old Tom Bombadil is glad to see you. Tom was wondering when one of you would come down here. Tom has been sitting on this stone for a very long time, and the stone has been very good company, but it does not talk much. It only hums. And Tom likes the humming, but Tom also likes talking, and there has been no one to talk to down here in the deep." Owl found his voice. "Who are you?" he said. He did not ask it the way that a king asks a stranger who has entered his hall uninvited. He asked it the way that a child asks a question about the stars, with wonder and uncertainty and the faintest edge of fear. "Who am I?" said Tom Bombadil. He laughed, and the laugh echoed through the chamber like water over smooth stones. Tom is Tom. Tom is the master. Tom was here before the stone, and before the fire, and before the water. Tom was here when there was nothing but the deep and the dark and the song. And Tom will be here when the stone is dust, and the fire is cold, and the water has run away to the sea. Tom is not a who, great smith. Tom is a here. Owl did not understand. He was the smith, the maker, the one who understood the substance of the world better than any other being in creation. But he did not understand this. He did not understand how a creature could have been here before the world was shaped. He did not understand how a creature could sit in the deepest darkness and hum a tune that the stone itself knew. He did not understand how a creature could look at him, Owl, the Valar, one of the powers of the world, and smile as if he were a neighbor stopping by for a cup of water. "Who made you?" Owl asked at last. He had to ask. It was the question that had been burning in him since the moment he had heard the singing. "Who made you? And why are you here? And how is it that the stone knows your song?" Tom Bombadil tilted his head. His feather bobbed. "No one made Tom," he said. "Tom was not made. Tom is. That is all. Tom is the oldest thing in the world, older than the stone, older than the fire, older than the water, older than the very ground that the great smith stands on. Tom was here when the first note of the music was sung, and Tom will be here when the last note fades. And as for the stone knowing Tom's song, the stone has always known Tom's song. The stone learned it from Tom long ago, before the great smith ever took up his hammer. The stone was Tom's student once, and Tom was the stone's teacher. Part 4. The First Stone. Owl looked at the stone on which Tom Bombadil sat. It was a plain stone, grey and unremarkable, the kind of stone that a smith would pass by without a second glance. But now, looking at it, Owl saw that it was not plain at all. It was old. It was very old. It was the oldest thing in the chamber, older than the walls, older than the floor, older than the mountain that pressed down from above. It was, Owl realized with a shock that ran through him like a crack through ice, the first stone of Arda, the foundation upon which everything else had been built, the stone that had existed before the Valar entered the world, before the mountains were raised and the valleys were carved, before there was anything in the universe except darkness and silence and the lingering echo of the music. And Tom Bombadil was sitting on it. Not with reverence, not with fear, but the way that a man sits on a familiar chair, the way that a child sits on a favorite rock. He was sitting on the first stone of the world as if it belonged to him, as if it had always belonged to him, as if the two of them were old friends who had been waiting for the world to arrive. "You are sitting on the first stone," Owl said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "That stone is older than the mountains. It is older than the earth itself. It is the foundation of everything I have built." Tom Bombadil nodded cheerfully. "Of course it is," he said. "Tom knows. Tom was here when it was made. Tom was here when it was not made, when there was nothing but the deep and the dark and the song. Tom watched it become. Tom watched the first stone harden out of the fire and the cold. Tom sat on it then, and Tom has been sitting on it ever since, and Tom will be sitting on it when the world forgets that it ever had a foundation. Owl felt something that he had never felt before. He felt small. He, the smith, the maker, the one who had shaped the mountains and carved the valleys and taught the metal its purpose, felt small in the presence of this little man in the blue coat and the yellow boots, because he understood now what he was looking at. He was looking at something that had not been made. He was looking at something that had always been. He was looking at the one being in all of creation who had never needed a maker. And the realization shook him to his core. Part 5. The Question of the Smith. Owl sat down. It was not a graceful movement. The Valar did not often sit, and when they did, it was upon thrones of their own making. But he lowered himself to the floor of the cavern, his great hammer resting across his knees, and he looked at Tom Bombadil with an expression of pure, unguarded wonder. "I have a question," Owl said. He did not say it the way that he usually said things, with the authority of a power of the world. He said it the way that a student says it to a teacher, with humility and hope. Tom Bombadil leaned forward. "Ask it," he said. "Tom likes questions. Questions are like seeds. You plant them in the ground and you wait, and you see what grows. Ask Tom your question, great smith, and Tom will see what he can grow for you." Owl took a breath that he did not need to take. "Why?" he said. "Why did you not shape the world? You were here before the stone. You were here before the fire and the water. You could have raised the mountains and carved the valleys and taught the metal its purpose. You could have been the smith. But you did not. You sat on the first stone and you sang." Why? Tom Bombadil was quiet for a moment. It was the first time he had been quiet since Owl had entered the chamber, and the silence was somehow heavier than all the stone above them. "Because the world did not need Tom to shape it," Tom Bombadil said at last. He said it gently, the way that one explains a simple truth to a child. The world was already shaped. It was shaped in the music, before the music was sung, before the first note was struck. The mountains were already in the stone, the valleys were already in the earth, the fire was already in the deep, and the water was already in the sea. Tom did not need to shape the world, because the world was already itself. Tom only needed to be here, and to sing, and to let the world remember what it was. Owl was silent. He had spent his entire existence shaping things. He had believed with all his heart that shaping was the highest calling, that making was the noblest work, that the world had needed him to bring order out of chaos. And now this strange little creature was telling him that the world had never needed shaping at all, that it had been complete from the beginning, that his work, his glorious work, had been nothing more than the uncovering of what was already there. "Is that true?" Owl asked. He was not angry. He was not even sad. He was simply confused, the way that a man is confused when he has spent his whole life walking in one direction and suddenly discovers that he has been walking in a circle. "It is true and it is not true," Tom Bombadil said. He tapped his boot against the first stone. The world was already itself, yes, but it was also waiting. It was waiting for the great smith to come down into the deep and uncover the mountains and carve the valleys. The mountains were in the stone, but they were asleep. The valleys were in the earth, but they were dreaming. The world needed a maker, great smith. It needed you. It needed you to wake the mountains and call the valleys out of their dreams. Tom could not have done that. Tom is not a maker. Tom is a rememberer. Tom remembers what the world was, and Tom sings, and the world remembers with Tom. But Tom cannot wake the mountains. Only the smith can wake the mountains. Part 6. The Two Makers. Owl looked at his hammer. He looked at his hands, the hands that had shaped so much, the hands that had raised mountains and carved valleys and forged metal and cut crystal. And he understood, for the first time, that there was a difference between the one who remembers and the one who makes. Tom Bombadil was the rememberer. He was the one who held the memory of the world in his song, the one who kept the world connected to what it had been before the making began. Aulë was the maker. He was the one who took the memory and gave it form, who took the dream and made it real, who woke the mountains and called the valleys out of their sleep. They were not rivals. They were not even different kinds of beings exactly. They were two halves of a single work, the work of creation, and neither of them could have done the work alone. Tom Bombadil could remember the world, but he could not make it. Aulë could make the world, but he could not remember it. Together, they were complete. Together, they were the thing that the world had been waiting for. "We are two makers," Aulë said slowly, testing the words. He had never thought of himself as one of two. He had always thought of himself as the only one, the smith, the maker, the one who stood apart from all the others. But now he saw that he had been wrong. There had been another all along, not a rival but a partner, not a threat but a companion. Tom Bombadil laughed. His laugh was like the sound of water over smooth stones. "We are not two makers," he said. "Tom is not a maker. Tom is a rememberer. The great smith is the maker. But the maker needs the rememberer, and the rememberer needs the maker. That is the way of the world. That is the way it has always been. The world is made of two things, great smith, the memory of what it was and the making of what it will be. Tom is the memory, the great smith is the making, and together the two of them are the world." Aulë was silent for a long time. He sat on the floor of the deepest cavern in the earth, with the first stone before him, and the little man in the blue coat sitting on it, and he thought about what he had been told. He thought about the mountains he had raised, and the valleys he had carved, and the metal he had taught to flow. And he realized that all of it, all of his glorious work, had been the making of what Tom Bombadil had been remembering. The two of them had been working together all along, without ever meeting, without ever knowing that the other existed. He had not shaped the first stone, he had only uncovered it, and he was grateful. Part 7. The Song of the Depths. They sat together in the darkness for a long time. Aulë did not know how long. Time did not pass in the deep earth, the way that it passed on the surface, where the lamps would one day shine and the stars would one day turn. It moved differently down there, slowly, like water seeping through rock. And in that slow, patient darkness, Aulë and Tom Bombadil talked. They talked about the mountains. Tom Bombadil told Aulë the names that the mountains had given themselves before the Valar had ever touched them, and Aulë realized that he had been renaming things that already had names. They talked about the metal. Tom Bombadil told Aulë where the metal had been hiding, in the veins of the earth, waiting to be found, and Aulë realized that he had not discovered the metal, but been led to it. They talked about the water. Tom Bombadil sang the song of the water, the song that the rivers would one day sing as they ran to the sea, and Aulë heard in it the echo of Ulmo's own music, and he understood that even the Lord of Waters had been listening to a song that was older than he was. And then, at the end of their long talk, Tom Bombadil did something that Aulë would never forget. He began to sing. Not the humming that Aulë had first heard, the aimless tune of being, but a real song, a song of making, a song that Tom Bombadil had never sung before and would never sing again. It was the song of the first stone. The stone sang back. Aulë heard it, felt the whole of the deep earth resonate with the song, the way that a bell resonates with the strike of a hammer. And in that moment, Aulë the smith understood everything. He understood that he had been given a gift that no other being in creation had ever received. He had been shown the secret of the world by the one being who had always known it. He had been taught by a little man in a blue coat and yellow boots, the thing that he had spent his entire existence trying to learn. The world was already made. The world was always already made. And the work of the Maker was not to create, but to reveal. Part 8. The Parting. At last Aulë rose. He had been in the deep earth for a long time, and he knew that his work was calling to him. The mountains were waiting to be raised. The valleys were waiting to be carved. The world was waiting to be shaped, not into something new, but into what it had always been. And Aulë knew now that he could do that work. He knew how to do that work. He had been given the knowledge that he needed, the knowledge of the first stone and the song of the depths, and he was ready. "I must go," Aulë said. He said it with regret, because he did not want to leave. He wanted to stay in the deep earth with Tom Bombadil, sitting on the floor of the cavern, listening to the song of the first stone. But he was the smith, and the smith's place was at the forge, and the world needed him. Tom Bombadil nodded. "Go," he said. "Go and raise the mountains. Go and carve the valleys. Go and wake the world from its long sleep. Tom will be here. Tom is always here. And when the great smith has finished his work, and the world is awake and alive, Tom will still be here, sitting on the first stone, singing the song of the deep." Aulë bowed. It was the first time that a Valar had ever bowed to any being in the world, and it would be the last, but Aulë did not care. He bowed to Tom Bombadil, the master, the rememberer, the one who had been here before the first stone. And then he turned and walked out of the chamber, back up through the tunnels and the caverns, back toward the surface of the young world, carrying with him the knowledge that would shape everything he ever made. Behind him, Tom Bombadil sat on the first stone and sang. Part 9. The Memory of the Deep. Aulë never spoke of his meeting with Tom Bombadil to the other Valar. He did not know how to explain it. He did not know how to tell Manwë that there was a creature in the deep earth who was older than the world, or how to tell Yavanna that the forests she was dreaming of had already been dreamed by someone else, or how to tell Ulmo that the song of the water was not his own. So he kept the secret. He carried it with him through all the long ages of his work, through the raising of the mountains, and the carving of the valleys, and the forging of the first metal, and the cutting of the first crystal. And it shaped everything he did. When the two lamps were raised, Aulë stood beneath them and remembered the darkness of the deep earth, and he was glad. When the elves awoke at Cuivinan, Aulë watched them from afar, and remembered the little man in the blue coat, and he wondered if the elves would ever meet him. When he made the dwarves in secret, shaping them from the stone of the earth, he remembered the song of the first stone, and he put a little of that song into the hearts of his children, so that they would always feel the pull of the deep places. And when the dwarves were discovered, and Ilúvatar spoke to Aulë and forgave him for his presumption, Aulë heard in the voice of the One the faintest echo of the song that Tom Bombadil had sung in the darkness. And he understood that the two of them, the Maker and the Rememberer, had both been part of the same plan all along. Tom Bombadil, for his part, never spoke of Aulë either. He did not speak of the Valar at all, except in the old songs that he sang to the trees and the stones and the water. But if you listened carefully, on certain nights when the wind was still and the moon was dark, you could hear, faint and far away, a humming that was not quite a song and not quite a tune. It was the song of the first stone, the song that Tom Bombadil had sung in the deep earth before the world had light. And the stone remembered it. The stone would always remember it. Because the stone had been there, and the stone had heard, and the stone knew that before the great smith ever raised his hammer, there was a little man in a blue coat and yellow boots, sitting on the first stone, singing the world into being. That was the true shaping of the first stone. That was the work that Aulë had only finished. That was the secret of the deep, and it had been kept for all the ages of the world, and it would be kept until the world was remade. And Tom Bombadil would still be there, singing.